It was not only animals that St. Francis is known to have great love for, but it was humans. St. Francis of Assisi once went down to a village with one of his monks with the purpose to preach the gospel. They engaged the locals in talk and helped them with their work, sharing stories, entering into the life of the community. As the end of the day neared, Francis said that it was time for them to return to the monastery. They were about to make their way out of the village when Francis's friend, with great concern, said, "Didn't we come here to preach the gospel to these people? When are we going to do that?" Francis turned to his brother monk and said, "If these people have not heard the gospel today, then reading from the Bible will not make any difference to them." And so they went on their way. If Francis had been an Episcopalian, it is fairly said that he had read, marked, learned, and inwardly digested all of today's readings. The letter from James states it plainly, "But be doers of the word and not merely hearers who deceive themselves. For if any are hearers of the word and not doers, they are like those who look at themselves in a mirror, for they look at themselves and on going away immediately forget what they were. But you must be doers of the word." James has been misunderstood oftentimes and thus criticized for advocating a theology of works. That is to say, for allegedly holding the view that salvation is possible through doing good works. What gets James into trouble is this: so faith by itself, if it has no works, is dead. But this is merely an extension of the encouragement to be doers of the word. For James, the doing of good works, or more simply, works, is nothing more than hearing the good news and living its call. In other words, if we hear the gospel and understand its message, we will take up naturally the work of Jesus Christ and continue that work in our own communities. We are all called to active engagement, but never as an optional extra. As another Franciscan, Richard Rohr, whom I studied in seminary and is now the founder of the Center for Contemplation and Action, puts it, the most important word in the phrase contemplation and action is "and." James leaves no one guessing about the importance of that gospel imperative. This then is one of the links with Mark's gospel. It is a precise picture of Jesus in action, Jesus bringing healing to a man who had been deaf and mute. But the accounts of Jesus' ministry are not about history. Their purpose is spiritual. In other words, what is said about Jesus tells the reader something about God. God's compassion for the broken and wounded, God's compassion for the lost and the floundering. Spiritually, we become aware of a power beyond ourselves which works in our midst to end suffering. It is key for us to remember that people such as the deaf-mute and lepers and those who look different were excluded from any kind of public access to God through the temple. The advent of Jesus meant that the outcast and the marginalized, for the first time in their lives, had direct access to God. Jesus' touch was just not niceness. Jesus' touch was a great sign to the people of the time who were able to read the signs and understand the metaphors behind Jesus' actions, that God was working in their midst to bring about the time of peace that had been promised years before. Scholars would argue that the story in Mark is symbolic rather than literal. To us persons of faith, such a view speaks about the spiritual truths that the story reveals. Certainty cancels our faith. How does anyone have faith which always holds the unseen and partially known in tension with lived reality and experience if the answers are clear, given, and indisputable? If anything can be proved beyond doubt, then faith in it is pointless. Spirituality is always our concern. And in the case of this story, hope is supplied by an oracle from the prophet Isaiah, in the words of today's reading from the Hebrew Scriptures. Then the eyes of the blind shall be opened, and the ears of the deaf unstopped. Then the lame shall leap like a deer, and the tongue of the speechless sing for joy. For waters shall break forth in the wilderness and streams in the desert. Isaiah was writing for the people in exile in Babylon, offering them hope that they would return to their land, the land promised and given by God. Yet Isaiah is also hope for exiles of every time and place. And there are perhaps no sorrier exiles than those who are estranged from the living God. There will come a time, Isaiah says, in effect, when what is wrong will be righted. Mark understood Jesus, the Son of God, as bringing in the time spoken of by Isaiah. That is good news for Mark, that in Jesus, what is wrong with the world is being made right. What is broken is being made whole. What is afflicted is being healed. And so Mark makes a link between his present and the chaotic world of the prophet Isaiah before him. I think the continuing spiritual reality for St. Christopher's is that the story does not end with Mark's gospel. It continues to here and now. Good news lives where there is distress, injustice, and affliction, and all that is contrary to God's purpose and vision for a saved humanity. Centuries ago, James understood this call to abiding action. His words remain true today as they were when they were written. When Christians, each of us, seek the lost, comfort the grieving, and heal the sick, we are neither acting for our own sakes nor because we are nice people. We are certainly not acting because we believe we can earn our place in the kingdom by what we do. No, we Christians do these things because we are called to continue the work of Jesus. We share in Jesus' ministry and take the message of the good news into the places where people are unable to hear it. We take the message to places where people have no voice, among them the poor and the powerless. For in today's world, the deaf and the mute are found everywhere, even in the church. Mark reminds us of God's will that suffering should no longer be. The letter of James reminds us that we have a share in the same work as Jesus. In a sense, when we accept our calling and engage the ministry of Jesus, we actually become Jesus. And the kingdom of heaven is once more brought near. Every time and in every loving, care-filled, compassion-saturated action, In the words of St. Francis, preach the gospel everywhere. If necessary, use words. And the people said,
Amen.